Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of ShareIT. My name is, am I sharing my screen?
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. My name is Emil Trebitska. I'm a software developer in Thoughtworks Italy. And together with Ronnie, Mario, and Pallavi, we are going to be the host for this event. Before passing the mic to the speaker, Shining, I will take 2 minutes of your time to talk about what ShareIT is and what is the code of conduct for today. So ShareIT is an event organized by Thoughtworks. Thoughtworks is a global consultancy company. We are present all over the world. In Italy, our offices are in Milan, but we are distributed all over the country and work remotely. In Thoughtworks, we put a lot of emphasis on learning, but also on teaching. Many of our colleagues have written well-known books, as you can see from this slide. In Italy, we have decided to follow this tradition by doing ShareIT. So what is ShareIT? ShareIT is a community. Our mission is to empower individuals and organizations. And we have the goal to contribute to the community by sharing with the external world our experience. So we organize these regular evening events, and we share our experience about architecture, agile, team practices, diversity and inclusion that we really care about. Let me go to the code of conduct for today. Be kind and excellent to each other, be respectful. Any question is a valid question. We all come from different experiences, so we can learn from each other. Before passing the mic to Shining, let me add that we have a Q&A feature in Zoom where you can write your questions. Shining will talk about designing your next recto activities around the team needs. And without further ado, let me pass the mic to Shining. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Emil. Hi, everyone. My name is Shining, and I'm a quality analyst consultant at Thoughtworks. And I'm trying to move my mouse here. And the title of my talk today is Designing Your Retro Activities Around Team Needs. Sorry, my laptop is a bit slow. Retro means retrospectives. Team retrospectives, it's a ceremony in agile practices. And today's talk is for everyone who has had any team retrospectives, whether you are a facilitator, an agile coach, or just a team member. And I like to share today what I've learned in many different teams, and they had different problems, different team structures, different agile practices, and I've also played different roles. Most of the times I was a software quality professional, but sometimes I was also a Scrum Master or an Agile coach. I really believe that today we can have actually a lot of great discussions with the experience that you bring. So I like to make it as engaging as possible, even though I have quite a lot of context that I'm trying to go through today. So what I'll do is at the end of each slide, I would pause for a short break to see if there's any quick questions that I can answer. And feel free to write down any questions. If I think it might take longer, then we will reserve it to the end of this talk to answer that. Plus, at the end, you will receive a poll with questions from us and questions from me that you can fill out. And without further ado, let me go through the agenda for today. So this is how I'm going to structure the talk today. In the first session, we're going to talk about how much value your current retro is adding to your team, and how can a retro add value to your team, and how to assess that value added. In the second section, we're going to talk about, okay, from the value, how can we bring the value into your retro? And the model that the framework I'm proposing is through team needs. And so I will introduce you to some models of team needs. And finally, we will talk really quickly about my toolbox for when I design my team retros. And finally, we will have one short summary. And if there's more time, then we can go through the appendix very quickly. Here are examples of how you can choose some activities that are popular and according to your team needs. So let me go to the first slide. So the first section, assessing the values added by your retros. I'm sure a lot of you have asked yourself this question. Do my retro activities make a difference to your team? You know, or maybe you're wondering, my retro activities used to bring value, but it doesn't seem like they're doing that anymore. If you have this question, I think it's very great. And maybe we should ask ourselves a little bit deeper. What do we mean by whether our retro activities are making a difference to our team? How do we define and how do we get value out of retro activities or retro in general? So let me remind everyone, what is the purpose of team retros? For those of you who are not familiar with team retro, let us review this shortly. And so team retro is one of the most important ceremonies in Agile practices. And Agile means that we do accept that things can happen very quickly, changes come, and the purpose of the team retros is to help us to respond to these changes. If you're familiar with two documents such as Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide, they also have descriptions regarding the purpose of team retros. So let me help you review. This is what they wrote. Agile Manifesto says, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. And in Scrum Guide, it says, the purpose of the sprint retrospective is to plan ways to increase quality and effectiveness. So you see that there are two concepts here in common between the two of them. One is effectiveness. The other one is to adjust your behavior and kind of sort of the way you would say plan in Scrum. There's another third keyword here, quality, that only appears in Scrum Guide. And so let's talk about the two keywords that are pink and yellow that they have in common here. So again, this is telling us that because we're Agile, changes come internally or externally, and we need to adjust. And because there are changes and we need to adjust effectively. If we adjust maybe too slowly or in the wrong way, we don't get effectiveness, and that also doesn't help. So now that we know the purpose, how should we what should we do in the retro so that we can effectively adjust to changes? That takes us to the next topic, the goals of our team retros. So in ThoughtWorks, so this is the question I was posing just now. In ThoughtWorks, what we try to do is to bring a common understanding in the team so that we can act based on the same understanding. And what do I mean by that? Exactly, we try to do 4 things. And so we will get into this a little bit. Sometimes it's very hard to do all 4, but we try very hard to do all of them. And you also see these 4 things coming up quite a lot in Scrum Guide and Agile Manifesto or any Agile book that you read about Team Retro. The first thing is review how we experienced the last iteration and surface problems. So this is where we try to talk about how we felt about the way we did something or everything in the last iteration. And if there's something we felt that isn't quite right, and we have to be open about it and talk about it. A lot of times there's an anti-pattern in the team where people started getting really technical and only talk about the things that went technically wrong or the problems of the product, but not the way we did something. And so that takes away the meaning of reflecting on ourselves. The second goal that we have is to review the outcome of any experiment in the last iteration or iterations if this experiment is large and takes a few iterations to observe the outcome. That means that, especially if you went through the Scrum training, you hear this quite a lot and stress that you do one experiment at a time and you review, you follow up and you observe the outcome. So obviously there are many teams who try to do many changes and that's also okay. But the problem is how many do you follow up? If you don't follow up, it's not going to be that effective. The third thing that we want to do in a retrospective is to brainstorm and align on how we should act in the next iteration, whether it's the same, continue to do the same thing, start doing another thing, stop doing something. What we don't want to do here is though, we don't want to spend too much time in team retrospective where we only talk about why things went wrong and it turns out to be a root cause analysis and not reflecting on ourselves and aligning on agreeing on what we want, how we want to do things in the next iteration. Oh, I missed one point in the previous goal, the yellow one. So there's also sometimes where a team tries say they want to do many experiments or one experiment, but then after the agreement, nothing happens. So you go to the next iteration and there's no outcome because you didn't try it out. Okay, so the last thing that we try to do in the retrospective, which is very important and sometimes overlooked, is to create a safe environment for voicing opinions and bringing topics. A lot of times you see a lot of people talking about creating a safe place to voice opinions, and that is definitely a a prerequisite for a very effective retro, because without almost everybody in the team being comfortable about talking about their feelings, about what happened, their opinions, you won't be able to achieve goal 1, 2, 3 effectively. But I would like to also mention a few other things around this topic of this number 4 goal. Sometimes there are people who have self-doubt and they don't feel that they're important enough. And this is not necessarily they don't feel safe because of conflict. It's because they have self-doubt. So it's something that the team may need to work on to bring these people to speak up. And other times you have people who for some reason don't want to bring topics up during the retro, but right after the retro happens. That also doesn't help. There are many reasons, and I've even seen people who are dominant and controlling who bring up topics after the retro and not during the retro. But during the retro, they're quite dominant. So you're wondering what is happening. So that could be also an anti-pattern. What is okay is though, that during the iteration, you talk about problems. You don't have to always wait until the team retro to bring up topics. It's healthy to bring up topics right when you see it with your team. You have things like a stand-up, refinement, right, planning. You can bring topics up there as well. It's just that the team retro is the time where you come together and see if you have another additional lessons learned that you want to make the team aware of or documented systematically. But please do talk about topics during the iteration, not just inside the retro. And later when you see the poll or the survey, you will see a question on this. And personally, I find it for my iteration, it's the hardest to achieve goal number 2. I have still working on following up the outcome of my team's experiment. And I've seen people who told me that the hardest for their team is goal number 3, because maybe they have a very complicated team structure and it's hard to align people's behavior. So every team has a little bit different problem here. Anyway, so now we know these 4 goals. Basically, every activities that you put in your team retro meeting should at least contribute to one of these goals. Makes sense, right? So in other words, if you have an activity and that it doesn't seem like it's contributing to any of these 4 goals, directly or indirectly, you probably would want to experiment and skip it in the next retro and see if your team misses that activity or not. I'll give an example of an indirect contribution, but still valuable from an activity. Let's say you have a stressful iteration, and some of the teams would then choose to do a fun activity before the reflection activity. And it's still valuable, even though it looks like it's only fun. But in this case, it might make a lot of sense because you just had a stressful iteration. So it might help the team to relax and might help the team to achieve, let's say, goal number 1, goal number 3, or goal number 4 better, right? So yeah, you always have to look at if an activity is contributing directly or indirectly. I think I have another here. So yeah, there's a summary of this slide. I'm pausing for any quick question or comment. If not, I will go on to the next slide. So now we're going to enter the main discussion of today. We're starting to talk about the activities that you can put in your team retro and their values. Here are some questions that you're probably also asking for in yourselves when you design team retro. Number one, how do different activities bring different values to my team? For example, because every iteration is very different or could be very different. Let's say in some cases, your team didn't really talk about what happened before this meeting. So your team as a whole is kind of unsure about what happened. You might want to find activities or a template that guide your team to explore or reflect on different aspects of the iteration in a more thorough way. Or you have a different situation. Let's say your team kind of knows what happened already, and you trust each other a lot to discuss openly, but you have massive time constraint and you really need to run a very fast retro, let's say 30 minutes only. So there are also templates, activities that can run faster than the ones that I just mentioned earlier that explore different aspects more thoroughly, that takes more time. So these are maybe some of the different values that different activities can bring. The second question is, okay, then how much value does an activity bring to my team? Let's say you have a situation where you're looking for a activity, fun activity right before your reflection activity. And you could choose an icebreaker or kudo time, which means you ask your teammates to write thank you notes to each other. So let's say you have a situation where the team accomplished a lot in the iteration, but it was very hard work. So both activities theoretically, if I don't know your team, make sense. So it really depends on your team to decide how much value would the icebreaker bring or would the kudo thank you time bring. And so that's the answer to this question a lot of time really depends on your team's needs. So you can see from these two questions, the answer from these two questions, we see that our challenge today inside the team can be very different from what we get tomorrow and what another team faces. And this is what I mean by team needs. And so the big idea in today's talk is that if we address the team needs, then we can bring, this is a way, I'm not saying this is the only way. If we address team needs in the design of our team retro, we can bring quite a lot of value. And in my career, I've seen some really great Agile coaches, and what they have done is they spent a lot of time observing and asking the team during the iteration and ask people how they feel, and they try to bring a very helpful main activity for the team retro. And this is not, I'm not advertising and saying that this is the right way to do it, but this is how some of the teams invest energy and time to the design of a team retro. And what I'm hoping to show you is that some activities are more than others. able to bring value to your team's current situation and therefore more value to your team. And I have a third question that I also ask myself. Is there a more structured way to know which activity brings what value? And the reason I ask myself this question is because if I know the answer to this question, I could choose and mix different activities to form a retro. So recap so far, we talk about team needs, and it's different from iteration to iteration and different from team to team. And it's one really useful framework to bring value to your team. So the next thing what we're gonna do is to look at different models to help you identify your team needs. Once you correctly identify your team needs, it's so much easier to pick an activity or a template, because you can read about so many activities and templates online, and often you even read what people say and recommend and tell you the pros and cons of this template, and you will be able to see, okay, this one might fit my team better or not. And then the third step would be you try it out, talk to your team and see if this is a good template for this iteration and why or why not. Get some feedback, and over time you will get a lot better in designing your template. I'm pausing for questions before going to the next slide. Okay, then I will go to the next slide. So I have a bonus question here, and I would like you to write in the chat. And the bonus question is, are retro activities in the form of a board necessary for an effective and helpful team retro? I'd like to see what you have to say to this question. And if you're willing to share your experience. Oh, chat is disabled. Could I get the facilitator to try to figure out what's happening?
Yes, we are trying to understand. In the meantime, we can also use the Q&A chat also to answer to these questions. That it is enabled, so.
Yeah, okay, so, okay, good. Anyone who wants to answer this question? Thank you. To answer Masa's question, no, I don't mean a physical board, but things like templates that like a lot of really popular one, like liked, learned, you know, something that you can, it can be digital, it can be an actual board. Okay, Elena, would you like to talk about your experience? If you're willing to talk about your experience, we can unmute you, Elena.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's not necessary to have a board because you can still do, in my experience, you can still talk about the action items that you had, you can still make an activity, maybe a more interactive activity, you know, and you can move around and you talk with your teammates without having the board. But it might be also more helpful to visualize what you're writing, or if you want to write things down, you can still use stickies to write things down. I've been to some retros that we didn't have a board, either virtual or physical, and that also worked.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you, Elena. I want to share really quickly about one team I had, and also another colleague of mine had a similar experience with one of his previous teams. We had experience with really good retros. It really depends on your team. Now, like Elena says, if your team really needs some visual help, then a board might help. But if not, if you can accomplish the 4 goals without a board, why not? I've seen teams who just go to the company's cafeteria, order ice cream, all sit together, talk, and the thing is they really talk and they really write down what they want to do in the next retro, and then it just works. And every retro is like that. So it really, we're just talking about a way to add value, and it's not the only way. Thank you very much for sharing, Elena. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next section, which is where I introduce different models that you can use to identify your team needs. And some common situations that you may encounter where you might need different kinds of templates or activities are, I have 4 of them here. The first one is when your team has a special need to either focus on only the past events or only the future ones. So we call this past or future orientation. And there are some, when you read about different templates, you will see that some of them will say, this is a future perspective template. And this is what they mean, that the template focus more on discussion about what's coming and not what happened. Most of the time, your template will consist both in the discussion, but there are some cases where you really just want to focus on what happened in the past or what will happen in the future. The second one is a little bit similar to the first one in some way, whether you have a regular team, a regular product team, that's what I mean, or you have some event or actions for software people, for example, a bug bash event where the whole company, doesn't matter which department, ask for volunteers to test your software at the same time. It's like an action. And then you might want to do this, I don't know, once a year or so. And every time you want to learn how you can organize the event better next time, or what you have done this time that works so much better than last year's, for example. The third situation is whether you have a developer team versus you have a cross-team retro, scaled agile team retro, where you have what happened in a scaled team retro is probably that each of the individual teams already had their retro, and they already talked about what they want to bring into the scaled team retro. And so as opposed to the regular dev team retro, in the scale team retro, people have already the topic prepared that they want to talk about, and also the opinion that their team wants to share with the whole scaled team. The last one has to do with team structure, whether your team is consisting of purely internal employees or with a lot of external parties. And this can also be a little bit of overlapping situation with some of the previous 3 points. It's just that when you have different organizations coming together into a retro, it might be more difficult to talk about and to talk about what happened and talk about what each other values, what is important for each stakeholder party, and so on. So that you might want to have a different need and might want to look for different template that can be more useful for this situation. I'm pausing for any question or comments. Do you see any other team situation that's not listed here? Okay, if not, I will go to the next slide, which is the model that I use the most for my team retro. And this is a model called Topmans stages of group development. I'm assuming that not everyone knows what this is, so I will have to explain a little bit. So Topmans stages of group development is a model that it's a way to describe the life cycle of a team, from forming the team to dissolving of the team. And instead of saying stages of group development, I would more like to propose thinking about it as like the state of your team. And if you read online about this model, they spend a lot of time talking about what happens in different stage, or I call state, of your team. And they don't really talk about so much about the needs of each of your team at each stage or state. And but I use this model a lot, and I derive the needs of the team from this model. I use this model a lot for regular dev team retro, product team retros, and that's the reason why I would like to propose it to you here. So let's take a look at the different stages or states in this model and what different team needs there you can identify. The first state is forming. You have a team that comes together as a new team, and people might not know each other very well, so they have the need to get to know each other. And also, even if it's the same people or largely the same people, but maybe they're coming together for a different reason this time, different project, different product. So they most likely have the need to clarify the product vision, goals, and so on. So this is a stage or a state that definitely would happen to every team. The next one might not be going through for every team. It's called the storming stage or state. And this is where people have a lot of conflict at the beginning when they just right after they form the team. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding or personality clashes here. So I've derived my understanding that the team will need to resolve conflict by understanding where each other's coming from and why some people are behaving the way they do. If you have a small storming or large storming, you do have the need to take a look at your team values and team rules. Like I said, not every team goes through this kind of turmoil. The next stage is something that definitely every team would go through if it can get past or skip this storming stage or state. It's called norming. And this is when team members are finding their places in the team. So in this stage or state, they're still not very high performant. So the first need for them is to become more performant. And the second one is to find their places in the team and discuss role expectations, not necessarily in the order first and second, I'm just listing them out. And this is also a really good time to help your team practice receiving and giving feedback. So you might have a need to do that with your team. The next stage or state is called performing. And unfortunately, some teams don't ever get to this stage where they are very high performant. They just maybe stay in norming or storming and couldn't get past their bottleneck. But if you are fortunate enough to come to the high performing state, then the team has the need of talking about how to improve the ways of working, how to increase the quality of any output, and also watch out that some people might get burned out. You might have the need to talk about how people are feeling physically, mentally, psychologically. And the last stage or the state is adjoining, means goodbye. And this can be emotional for a lot of teams. And so the team has the need to say goodbye to the people who are leaving. Sometimes it's not the whole team dissolving, it's just some people are leaving. And then they have the need to talk about how they should go on without these team members. There are adjustments that they have to make, whether they are going on without this team member, or they need to recruit a new member, or the next member is already coming in, right? So that's why I have an arrow going back to the state forming, because a lot of times some people are leaving at the same time other people are coming in, and then you need to, it's essentially a new team where you have to get to know each other again, talk about the product vision and goals and so on. Okay, and let me take a look at the questions here. Is it common for teams to go backwards at times across stages? What advice would you give to deal with these situations? Yes, so that is why I don't prefer the name stages, even though that's the official name. I prefer state, to think of them as state, because when you have a state, you can go back and forth, right? You could be forming, not storming, going to norming, performing, but then somehow you got stuck and you're not high performant anymore. You go back to norming, and I don't know, maybe even escalating and go back to storming. It can also happen. And the good thing about the team needs identified in this slide is that it doesn't matter whether your team is going forward or backward in the loop. You can look at the team needs I listed here and use these listed needs to find the template or activity that suits your situation. Does this answer your question? Yeah, okay, good. So one thing to conclude this slide. So the meaning, and sorry, what I want you to take away from this slide is that all these team needs that we identify at each stage is to help us, to help the team to have a meaningful conversation. That is, I just wanted to show you how important it is, or how valuable it is to identify your team needs correctly before you select in any activity to be put into your team retro. Okay, so now I will quickly talk about the designer's toolbox of team retros. There are 4 things I want to talk about here. The first one is the reflective activities that is the main part of the retro. That is something you can design and actually what most people focus on. But there are also 2 kinds of other kinds of activities that you can do to really set the stage for before this very big, heavy reflection activity. The green one are the fun activities. So I mentioned briefly earlier, things like icebreakers, kudos, they don't take too much time, but it helps people to get into the mood and opens up for the reflection. If your team isn't feeling so great, sometimes then you need to consider doing some of the one of the safety activities. For example, reading the prime directive to remind themselves not to blame anybody if something went wrong, or to do a safety check to see if people are indeed willing to talk about most topics. This is very good when you know that people are not having big conflict, but you're unsure whether people are open to express in their opinions in the retro. Or mood checking. This can be helpful. For example, if you know that somebody in your team has a personal family problem that's unrelated to work, but can affect the work, right? So might be good to do that before the main activity. In picking the activities, I suggest the 4th toolbox, the 4th tool in the toolbox, which is a questioning skill. And I usually like the one called 5 whys, where you just keep on asking why 5 times to get to the root of a question. And this skill is very useful to help you find out which template helps the team the most, or if they don't like the template that you propose when you enter the team retro, for any reasons, may not be any serious reason. It's just sometimes teams just don't like the template. They would like to ask for another one. And you can, before you propose another one, you use this questioning skill to ask what's going on and why they don't like this one in order to help them to find a better one. And also during the retro, it helps a lot to as a facilitator if you have this skill. Now notice that I didn't put facilitator as a tool in the toolbox because there are, in my opinion, strong pros and cons to pick an external or an internal facilitator. And the point is, again, every team is very different. And you have to, it's really a private decision. And some teams, they decide it's a good idea to have an external facilitator. Some other ones don't even want a facilitator. So it's a very private decision. And either way can work very well. It really is not, I don't believe it's an important tool in the toolbox, but it is something you have to talk to your team about. I'm pausing for quick questions. No? Okay, then we are almost done. So I have a last tip to remind you. So now you know so much. Go ahead, pick a design or design your own, and remember to get feedback. And don't forget that your team also has their own personality, and that might be an influencing factor for your design and feedback. So I have a quick summary slide here to recap on what we've learned, what I've shared so far in the talk. The first topic I shared was how to assess your value added. And remember to review the purpose and the goals of a retro. And the second point I talked about is the framework of using team needs in your design to help us achieve the goals and purpose of Team Retro. And then the third one is about different models that can help you identify your team's current needs. Once you know the different needs, you can go ahead and design and use the toolbox to help you find the design and so on, or adjust your design. And the most important tool here is your questioning skill. Finally, continue to improve by getting feedback from your team about the design, and that will help you to pick a better one, more suitable one for your team over time. And my facilitator has just put out a poll with a few questions. If you have time, please fill in. And you don't lose these questions at the end of this presentation. I also have a link to a Google form. So if you miss this poll, you can still answer these questions in my survey. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. Any questions? No? So if there's no question, let me give you a very quick overview of what's in the appendix. And this is too much information, and so unfortunately I cannot present this in this talk, but here I have some, for each of the models that we mentioned, I have some examples that you can take a look. And these are for the situation when you really have no idea how many templates there are out there, or you are just so overwhelmed. But you already have a good idea of your team's current situation and current need. Then feel free to take a look at these templates, examples, read about them, and see if they would work for your team. And the next slide is the same, the same piece of information, but for different states of the Topmans model. And I've also included side activities that might work well for you, that you want to make sense to try for different states and stages. And notice how, because forming, norming, performing, joining all have quite, actually all 5 states, they have quite different needs from the team. So you will see that some of the templates are quite, that I suggested here, they're quite different. So here I have all the links, as you can see. No, I cannot show, but you can see that there are links everywhere, and feel free to read about them. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me and ask me. And this is an example of what I designed. I've included in the previous slide. I've read a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, and I designed my own template out of this book. I don't think you can read it anywhere. I don't think you can find it anywhere online. But yeah, so I'm putting my template here. Okay, so yes, I really recommend the book, 5 Dysfunctions of the Team. It also has a cartoon comic version on Amazon, so that might be easier to digest. So finally, thank you for your time. And please give me your feedback. Let me try to copy. Let me see, can I put it here? Yeah, No, I cannot. Never mind. Okay, so thank you very much. I will give the talk back to the facilitator.
Thank you, Shining, for your great talk. Before letting you go and eat your dinner, I will just take another minute of your time. We will send the link of the recording and also the deck in the next days. And thank you for being here with us this evening, everyone. Have a great evening. Goodbye.